I was measuring flour for a tray of small lemon tarts when my sister's text landed like a paper cut right across the day. We're only inviting family. No preamble, no name at the end, just 5 neat words, the kind you might embroider on a decorative pillow if you hated whimsy. I read them twice while the oven blinked ready at me from the corner of my bakery kitchen, the fan tick-ticking as it cooled from the morning rush. It wasn't the first time I'd been told where the boundary ended, and I did not belong. The difference was, this time, the boundary was a wedding, air-kissed by flowers and soft lighting, something I thought would be easier than blood to sit through. It was my sister's wedding, half-sister, technically, if you want to get precise in the way people do when they're about to be unkind. Gwen and I shared a father and complicated childhoods. We did not share a mother, nor a schedule of who got to be considered legitimate. The text arrived with a ... bubble, then nothing. I waited, tasting sugar dust in the air while steam curled from the dishwashers. No explanation came. My hands remembered the pastry cutter and the lemon curd, the way muscle memory rescues you when your brain threatens to lock up. I filled the shells, I plated 3 for a pickup order, I wiped my counter twice. Then I called her. "Gwen," I said when she answered. I kept my voice light, too bright for the fluorescent lights. "I just got your text." She breathed out. In the background, I could hear the scratch of a pen and the flip of paper. Gwen has always organized her anxiety into clipboards. The wedding must have been a thicket of them. "Gwen," she said, "don't make this weird." "I am asking a question," I said, gentle, careful. "Whose definition are we using for family?" "The venue is small," she said quickly. "We had to make hard decisions. We're just keeping it to family." "That means blood?" I asked. "Or does it mean the people you call when your car won't start?" "Gwen," she said again, my name like a stop sign, "please don't make me say it." "I already did," I said. I stared at the neon sticky note on the espresso machine that said, "Please tamp coffee gently," a note I had written for myself because when I am hurt, I tamp like I'm trying to compress the earth. She didn't speak for a moment. "It's not personal," she offered finally, and the words made me laugh before I could stop it. The sound startled us both. "Gwen," I said, "it is the most personal thing." "Don't do this," she said, voice tightening. "You have your bakery thing, and Dad's paying for most of it. Mom says we can't—" "Look, it's complicated. We just need this to be—" She trailed off, then landed on a word she thought was safe. "Simple."
"Not yet," I said and smiled a bakery smile. The one that says you already know the cake will be fine, even if it is listing in the oven. But I have my calendar with me and a deposit if we find a fit. 5 minutes later, I was sitting with the events manager, a man named Din with hair so smooth it could pass a breathalyzer. He pulled up charts while I explained. "It's for the 27th, I said. "Saturday, late afternoon into evening. Live music, acoustic. Food, past small plates. Capacity, whatever your fire code blesses. We are not interfering with the Hamilton Ballroom next door. We are adjacent. We'll keep the foyer traffic clean." "May I ask," he said, holding a stylus like a conductor and not writing anything yet, "what you're celebrating?" "Family," I said. His mouth did a tiny lift that then matured into a smile. I watched him decide that I didn't mean the kind that sues. "We can do that," he said. He quoted me a number and pressed his lips together like he knew I had 3 spreadsheets of budgets taped to walls. It was fair and also the kind of number that would make me peel my own grapes for a month. "I run a bakery," I said. "I can trade some of that in pastry and some in cash." "I can be bribed by millefeuille," he said solemnly. "Please don't repeat that." "I will bring witnesses," I said, and he laughed. By the time I crossed the lobby to the door, a copy of the contract hummed in my email and my calendar had a block of bright blue labeled "The Family Room." When I stepped back onto Arlington Street, the idea felt less like a balloon I might accidentally release and more like a kite I had learned to keep in the wind. The next morning began with laminated checklists and a meeting with my staff in the back room where we keep the extra bags of sugar. Theo sat with his long legs folded like a grasshopper and took notes everywhere at once. In his notebook, on his arm with a pen, in his head where he remembers people's preferred scone as if it could save a life. "We're doing a thing," I told them. I explained the room and the date, the intention, and the logistics. We need music, food, chairs, those fairy lights that make everyone think they are forgiven, and we need to not turn it into a spite party. I watched their faces. Bakeries are half flour, half people. The people portion of mine had been assembled like the best recipes, not by exact measurement, but by a feeling for when the batter could hold one more ingredient and still rise. "Do we invite them?" asked Allegra, who piped buttercream like calligraphy. "It's not for them," I said, "but if they wander over because the music is better, the doors will not lock." "Spoken like a general," Theo said quietly. We made lists. I assigned vendor calls to Theo and the younger staff who love negotiation the way some people love soccer. I called Ms. Alvarez to confirm and texted Tariq to see if he could build a set list that moves around people like kind hands. I thought about what you feed a room full of people who have each survived a different kind of family. Between rushes, I drafted the invitation. I printed it on the bakery printer because sometimes the best thing you can do is admit you are not a stationery store. You are invited to the family room. Beneath that, in smaller print, because family is who holds your spare key and your history. Because the door is bigger than the rule. Because love deserves a place to sit. Date, time, address. A note about music and small plates. A gentle line. Doors open to all ages. Dress the way you feel most like yourself. I hand-delivered the first invitation to the florist, Poppy, next door, slipping it beneath a vase of peonies and taking a deep breath as if the scent could decide how brave I would be. Poppy read it and her eyes filled. "Asti," she said, using the nickname she gave me when she realized I know 16 kinds of sugar and none of them are the refined kind that melts you into somebody shapeless. "Tell me what flowers say, 'You belonged here all along.'" I said, "Whatever grows like a miracle even in city dirt." She nodded, as if that made the most sense anyone had made to her that day. I texted an invitation to Aunt Lena, my mother's older sister, who hadn't come to any holiday my father hosted in 10 years because a truce was never signed, and she's too old to fight guerrilla wars in dining rooms. She replied with a gif of applause and a string of heart emojis that looked like a small red marching band. I sent one to my cousin Jude, who used to babysit me and then moved to Philly and grew quieter over time. He wrote back in all caps that he would bring his harmonica and also his whole heart. Not all the replies were immediate. Some arrived like messages from ships delayed by weather. I could feel them out there, the people who have been told, "Not this time," so often, they stopped keeping their nice shoes ready by the door. Meanwhile, the wedding marched forward down the street in a house with a white fence. I learned the details the way you learn the weather, not because you want to, but because it arrives uninvited. My father's wife, Sharon, posted an Instagram of the place cards printed in slanted modern calligraphy and captioned it, "Family only at last." At night, I lay in bed above the bakery and pictured 2 rooms separated by a foyer,
like two hands cupped but not touching. I pictured doors and music and the way people fill a room in a pattern that makes sense only if you also understand their hearts. I pictured Gwen's face if she wandered in. I told myself stories until sleep found me like a tide. The city moved through the days toward the date. I made lists and crossed items off like a person meditating with a pencil. The community center's kids rehearsed in the multi-purpose room, Tio counting them in until the brass and strings remembered what it felt like to speak together. Poppy-threaded lights of warm white through garlands of eucalyptus and roses that smelled like you could learn a language if you breathed long enough. I booked 2 bartenders and a small army of servers who could carry 6 canapes on one tray without breathing on any of them. I called a local seamstress named Tamsin who tailored me a suit the color of cities at dusk. When she asked how comfortable I wanted to be, I said, as comfortable as a person who's about to walk into a room where she has not been counted and count herself. She looked at me over her glasses and nodded once. The week before, I saw my father at the tailor's 2 doors down. He was in a navy suit that has seen more boardrooms than vacations. He spotted me and stopped, then seemed to remember I was not heir. Aster, he said. His voice always sounded like the room was a courtroom and he had not decided whose side he was on. Dad, I said, the word fits me like a borrowed sweater, comfortable because I insist on it. You look expensive. He smiled carefully, which for him is the emotional equivalent of a full-body hug. Gearing up for the big day, I trust you got the note from Gwen. I did, I said. I trust you know how it sounded. He made a dismissive gesture I know better than my own handwriting. We had to limit the list. You know how these venues are. I do, I said. I let the sentence rest long enough for the next one to feel like a choice. I'm hosting a celebration next door. For everyone else. You're welcome to drop by. I watched surprise, then something like calculation move across his face like a weather front. Aster, he said, voice cooling, don't make a scene.
Dad, I said, putting my hands in my pockets so I wouldn't reach for him like I sometimes still want to. I'm making a room. He exhaled. Your mother always liked drama, he said, and then we were the 2 people we always are in scenes like this. Him, a man who has never met an emotion he didn't prefer you kept to yourself. Me, his daughter, who opened a bakery so she could serve hers on plates. See you at the hotel, I said, gently enough to bend, but not break. On the morning of the 27th, the city rose into one of those clear June days that make Boston forget its own moods. Sun pressed gold onto the tops of buildings. I threw open the bakery's windows and handed out cinnamon rolls to regulars who had become our chorus. Good morning, Aster. Break a leg, Aster. You're doing something beautiful, Aster. Theo handed me a coffee with my name written on the cup in his careful block letters, as if that might tether me to myself. At noon, I locked the bakery door and turned the sign to closed for a private celebration. I climbed the stairs to my apartment and stood before the mirror like a soldier who has pressed her uniform flat with the weight of her choices. I pulled on the suit. The lining felt like a promise of cool shade. I slid my feet into shoes that had never done me wrong. I fastened my grandmother's onyx pin to my lapel, the one my mother sent years ago, wrapped in a poem. In the envelope she'd written, "For when you need to look like your own ancestor." When I came back down, Theo was waiting with a crate of pastry boxes that smelled like almonds and sugar dreams. We loaded them into the van. Miss Alvarez met us at the curb in a dress the color of limes and courage. The hotel lobby held the strange quiet of places that are about to become loud. Staff wheeled carts like choreography. Down the corridor, the Hamilton ballroom doors stood slightly ajar, letting out a ribbon of strings warming up. I could hear, dimly, a woman's voice giving instructions in the tone of someone arranging furniture with her eyebrows. Sharon. Din met us at the entrance to the multi-purpose room, which had been transformed by Poppy into a glow. String lights looped from ceiling to ceiling like someone had taught the room to write cursive.
Tables bloomed with flowers that looked like small gardens had been convinced to sit still long enough to be admired. The stage at the far end held a low riser for the kids' orchestra and 2 microphones. "It's perfect," I said. My throat tightened and I cleared it in case it thought about betraying me. Theo and the servers did the sharp ballet of setup. Trays assembled into still life art. Laughter found corners to warm. I stood for a moment in the doorway and watched the room gather itself. People arrived. Aunt Lena walked in with a cane she didn't need and a hat entirely too honest to be polite. She kissed me so loudly that a man across the room started clapping. "You did this," she said into my hair. "Of course you did." The kids in Tariq's ensemble tuned, their faces earnest and bright, instruments shining like they'd been polished with care and hope. Tariq tapped the stand. The first song they played was "At Last," just like Miss Alvarez promised, and the room sighed and then stood taller. Couples swayed in the middle. 2 small boys with identical shoes invented a dance that might qualify as prayer. I worked the room like bread dough, turning it, checking temperature, making sure every corner had enough attention to rise. I greeted neighbors and customers and the quiet, thoughtful man from the tailor who told me he always thought cinnamon tasted like home. I thanked the servers, adjusted the lights, and tried not to peer too often into the foyer, where the stream of Hamilton ballroom guests flickered in and out, wearing the colors of money and decisions already made. At 4:30, Theo lifted a tray past my shoulder and murmured, "Incoming." I followed his glance. Gwen stood for a long second in the foyer, a bouquet in her hands as scouting report and camouflage. She saw me. There was a brief visible argument across her face between the part that wanted to scowl and the part that had once let me brush her hair on the couch while we watched baking competition shows. She walked in. The music swelled like a curtain opening. Conversations paused and then burbled differently around our shape in the room. Gwen stopped 2 paces from me and really looked at the space. "It's beautiful," she said, which we both knew meant, "I forgot that you are this capable of love." I said, "Congratulations," and I meant it. You look like someone who is going to have a nice life if she learns to say sorry sometimes." Gwen's mouth twitched. We really couldn't," she began, then stopped because across the foyer, Sharon's voice rose sharp like a bird of prey. "Gwendolyn, photos." Gwen winced like someone had stepped on the hem of her silk. She said, "I have to go." And then she lowered her voice. "Aster, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have sent that text like that. It was honest. Sometimes honest hurts like a brick and sometimes like a bruise. I didn't mean—" Then someone called her name again, the cadence of obedience built over years, tugging hard at the seams of her moment. She squeezed my hand once quick and small, like a woman hiding a candy from a child, and left. I stood very still for a count of 3. Mature adults can survive anything for a count of 3. Then I exhaled and turned back toward my room and the people who had come to be counted with me. At 6, Tariq played Nina Simone, and the teen horns found a melancholy that made them taller. Candles were lit. People who do not drink much but wanted something to do with their hands held glasses of sparkling water with lemon slices and pretended it was glamour. I passed canapé trays like a benevolent weather system, smoked trout on rye crisps, tiny tomato tarts that were possibly illegal in 3 countries for causing joy, slivers of manchego with quince. "All right," Ms. Alvarez said, clapping very lightly. "Speech." "I didn't write one," I lied. "She's been rehearsing in her head for a week," Theo told the nearest table, and my betrayal came with such warmth I forgave him immediately. I stepped to the mic and held it like the stem of a flower I didn't want to crush. The room organized its attention around me. Over my left shoulder I could see, through the open door of the foyer, people in the other room milling like mares before a race. I imagined their lights were gilded, their centerpieces tall enough to block the view of the people across the table you didn't want to talk to anyway. I could hear a distant clink of cutlery being set down by a person trained to be invisible. I said, "Thank you for coming," and the microphone turned my voice into something larger than I usually allow it to be. "This room exists because someone told me I didn't belong in another one." A murmur rose, then stilled. "It exists because sometimes the narrow door is not worth your smallness. It exists because love requires witnesses. And because some of us have been told to be quiet at tables where we brought the bread." A deep, warm chuckle rolled across the room. Aunt Lena's amen threaded through it like a harmony. "I am not interested in dragging anyone. I am interested in adding chairs." I gestured to the room, the lights, the kids on stage and their serious joy. "This is the family room. If someone told you you are too much or not enough or not really anything that can't be verified by a DNA test, the door is yours. Sit, eat, dance, be witnessed. And if you need a place to cry, the left corner near the ficus is," I pointed, "the official sobbing nook." Laughter unknotted the moment. They clapped, not like applause after a performance, but like hands meeting other hands in the relief of common meaning. From the foyer, a sound of tension like a string pulled too tight. I saw Sharon's profile for a second, hawk-like and handsome, a woman who has made a life of making other people small in the name of order. She glanced into our room as if we were a stain on the carpet. Then she was gone, but not before her eyes slid across me like a measure of blame. The evening deepened, the way rooms do when light makes agreements with shadow. Gwen drifted in again at 7, this time with the groom in tow, a man named Devon, with kind ears. He shook my hand with that precise pressure good men have that says they know their strength and how to apply it delicately. He said, "I've heard so much about you." I smiled, half self-deprecating, half besotted. He said, "All accurate, I hope. I wanted to say sorry about—" He gestured toward the other room as if the whole of it was some single object you could put on a shelf and dust occasionally. "You're in it now," I said, and we both smiled the rueful smile of people who understand gravity. He looked around our room, at the kids on stage, at the women leaning their heads on each other, as if oxygen had been made ambient here in a way that it wasn't in other rooms. He said, "This is the better party, not performatively." I said, "Don't tell your mother-in-law."
Not planning to, he said, then glanced over his shoulder. "I should get back, or I'll be missed and there will be a search party with clipboards." They left. I felt a soft pride. The kind you feel when you've set a table and people lower their shoulders and become themselves a little bit more because of it. I turned to check on the bar just as Din slipped to my side with a hesitant expression. "We have a small logistical hiccup," he said. Hotel speak for a thing that might be only slightly on fire. "What's wrong?" I asked. "The Hamilton Ballroom just requested we ask you to turn down the music," he said. "Your musicians are within our guidelines and decibels, but apparently the song you are playing is distracting." I listened. Tariq had just, bless him, launched into a medley that included Girl on Fire. I coughed a laugh. "We can play something less declarative," I said. I walked to the stage, leaned up, and murmured a request. Tariq nodded, eyes twinkling like an accomplice confectioner, and slid into Etta James again, which felt like a joke between co-conspirators and also kindness. The night warmed. Children fell asleep in chairs, a spaghetti of arms and dreams. Teenagers took turns at the mic to say things like, "Thank you for seeing me," and "My granddad always said I was too loud for Sundays, so this is nice." I watched joy move like weather. It was nearly 9 when the doors between the foyer and our room swung wider, not with curiosity this time, but purpose. Sharon strode in with 2 event staff trailing like commas.
Her jaw was set so hard you could have chipped a tooth on it. "Miss Lindwood," she said, checking a list as if I might be misfiled. "We need you to end this." Din materialized at my elbow like a man who intuitively knows where earthquakes will start. "Mrs. Hargrave," he began, all velvet and policy. "This event is fully permitted and contracted." Sharon's gaze sliced toward him, then back to me. "You are making a spectacle," she said. "You are siphoning guests." The word landed oily and cold. "This is our family's night. Yours is—" She gestured, trying to find a word that could carry both disdain and plausible deniability. "An intrusion." I let the silence be the thing that made eye contact with her first. "Your family is next door," I said evenly. "This room is here for everyone who has been told there is no room." "You weren't invited," she said, as if the weather had misbehaved. "I know," I said. "That's why I built a door." Sharon flushed high on her cheekbones. "If you don't close this down," she said, "we will have security escort you out." Din took a breath, a small one that might have been a prayer. "Mrs. Hargrave," he began, carefully, "with respect, this is not a possibility. Miss Lindwood is our client, the foyer is shared, our sound levels are compliant. Your coordinator approved the schedule that allows for both events." She blinked. I saw it then, the moment when the rules of a universe where you always win meet the smaller, truer rules of a room where contracts are written down and you can't swallow the other person's name. Her mouth flattened. "I will be speaking to your manager," she said to Din, which would have been more menacing if Din had not been wearing his manager name tag. And then she pivoted to me. "You are embarrassing yourself," she hissed. "And you are embarrassing Gwen." I said no, quietly, so only she could hear and it would land like a kindness I had not exactly intended. "You are embarrassing Gwen by making love sound like a closed account." For a moment, we were two women whose entire histories glowed faintly above our heads like saints in a painting. Then she turned and walked out, the commas behind her scuttling to keep up. I exhaled, more shakily than I liked. Theo's hand brushed my elbow. "Breathe. In through the nose, out through the cake." People who had witnessed the exchange with the kind of casual attention you give other people's families returned to their conversations. The music rose again, not louder, just braver. At 9:30, Tariq lifted his bow and the room hushed. "We have one more piece, and then our fearless pastry general is going to say the thing she's been pretending not to rehearse." Laughter. A few whoops. He nodded to the kids, and they played a heartbreakingly sincere version of Stand By Me that made my skin feel the way you feel when you remember you are a person someone else could lean on. I stepped forward. The microphone warmed in my hand. Across the foyer, the Hamilton ballroom doors were opening for the couple's first dance. Through the gap, I could see a swirl of light and the glitter of a dress that probably cost as much as my rent for a year. I could also see, just over Gwen's shoulder, my father, his mouth a line, his eyes calculating the angle of the room like a general mapping a field. "Thank you," I said, "for making a room with me." My voice did not shake. "For choosing—" From the foyer, a shout. It cut across our room and theirs like someone had split the night with a blade. Heads turned, the music stumbled and then stilled. The man in the doorway between the rooms was Devin. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking past me into my room, eyes searching. For a beat too long, he didn't seem to breathe. Behind him, I saw Gwen, color draining from her face. Sharon's hand shot out as if she could hold him in place by force of will. Devin's gaze found me, found the microphone in my hand. He raised his palm, walked towards us, and in the hush that followed, his voice carried, steady and strange. "Aster, I'm sorry to do this here, but I need a witness. All of you." He took another step into our room, as if it had gravity his own did not. "Something is wrong, and I think it starts with the word Family. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges worn like he'd been holding it for hours. He glanced once at Gwen, whose lips moved with a silent no. Sharon stepped forward, all warning. My father's face had shuddered into the mask he used in negotiations. Devin opened the paper. He looked up, and the hallway lights caught a sheen in his eyes that read less like fear and more like a man deciding which truth he will cost him less to live with in the morning. He said, "I found this in the coordinator's binder. It's a list." He swallowed. Of who counts. I felt the room wait, every breath tucked like a violinist's chin on the rest between notes. People shifted toward the doorway as if proximity could feed them clarity. Devin lifted the paper, hand shaking now, just slightly. "I need to read you something." And he said, and the wedding band on his finger flashed in the soft light as if it too had a pulse. "Because I think I'm about to change everything." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you.
Because I think I'm about to change everything. The words hardly finished crossing the air before my body remembered gravity. I put the microphone down on the stand, slow, as if a sudden movement might spook the moment into scattering. Devin unfolded the paper with the care you give to fragile things, or bombs. The kids on stage held their instruments at ease. Even Tariq forgot to pretend to be casual. Sharon reached for the paper and stopped herself when the room's attention pressed against her like weather. Gwen took one step into our doorway and hovered there, flowers trembling in hands that had ice skating rinks worth of composure. "Read it," Aunt Lena said, her voice sailing across rows of faces. She didn't shout. She set the tone like a tuning fork. Devin swallowed and found the first line with his eyes. Header says, "Family Protocol, Wedding Week." Subheader, "For vendors and coordinators only." He glanced up. This was in the front pocket of the binder, a printed copy, tabbed. Din made a small, astonished noise, as if someone had just brought a live swan through the lobby and pretended it was a centerpiece. Devin read, "Tier A, family, immediate blood relatives and approved spouses. Tier B, strategic, donors, board members, legacy partners. Tier C, staff, event, domestic, and security. Exclusions, non-marital offspring, estranged relations, companions, press." He paused, the paper rustling like a cheap curtain in an expensive room. He breathed once, steadied. It says, "Half-sister Aster Linwood, not to be admitted to ballroom or any official photography, avoidable optics. If sighted on hotel property, request removal." My full name in his mouth felt like a bell someone had struck with a spoon. The room pulled its breath in and held it between clenched teeth. I could hear the ventilation system for the first time all night. "Stop," my father said from the ballroom foyer, his voice clipping the edge of civility. He took a step into view, hand raised the way you raise a hand at a deposition, like you intend to cross-examine the heir. "This is not the time." "It seems," Devin said, surprisingly calm, "that time happened to us anyway." He lowered the paper, as if to rest it, and then thought better. "There's more. A quote, Tier A must be seated in view of cameras at all times. Tier B should be rotated through for visuals. Tier C stays invisible. If questioned, respond, 'We're only inviting family.'" End quote. He looked up at Gwen then. Apology clear as rain in summer. "It's a script," he said. Gwen's cheeks went slack. You told them to say that?" she asked, eyes flitting to Sharon, to our father. Her voice had the wobble of a figure skater who just realized the ice is thinner than the music suggests. Sharon recovered her poise like a cat recovers its dignity after falling off a counter. She said crisply, "Every event has messaging. This is a framework. We cannot control what people gossip about if we don't control what we say." "You don't control who people are," I said. The words quiet and level enough to carry. "You just control who gets the rentals." A ripple of humor and pain went round in equal measure. Din took one measured step forward, diplomacy incarnate. He said, "Mrs. Hargrave, for the record, this paper did not come from our team."
Of course it didn't, she snapped without looking at him. It came from the consultants I hired because this family refuses to understand the basic mechanics of public life. She lifted her chin at me, then at Devin, and that includes you, young man. Kindly return my property. It's a copy, Devin said. There are more in the binder. He flipped the page and flinched as he read. He didn't speak the next line immediately. He looked to Gwen first. Do you want me to stop? He asked, and his gentleness in that question made my ribs press outward, as if my body was trying to make more room for the fact of decency. Gwen stared at the paper like it was an animal that might bite and also an x-ray of her own bones. She shook her head, a motion so small it could have been mistaken for a tremor. She whispered, "Read it," he nodded. Budget notes, balance contingent on Tier A compliance. Final vendor payments released upon verification of family-only attendance and approved press assets. Devin's voice went rough. There's a line about your trust, Gwen. Foundation grant for newlyweds, dispersed after compliance. My father stopped pretending to be composed. He barked, that document is proprietary. It is not for public consumption. Public, Aunt Lena murmured, is what happens when you climb onto a stage and call it your living room. The people of my room, my family room, looked from person to person and then set themselves lower into their chairs, like people do when a sermon is going to include their real names. A few from the ballroom had drifted closer, pulled by the gravitational fact of a truth said out loud. Dad, Gwen said, and the words sounded exactly like, when you catch a child with sugar on her face and ask if she's been in the jar. You tied our grant to excluding Aster? Language, Sharon said sharply. Not tied. Conditional upon prudence, upon narrative integrity. Narrative integrity, I echoed, as if I'd found a new pastry term and couldn't decide whether to adopt it ironically. The groom folded the protocol once, twice, then held it with both hands like some primitive instrument he might use to start a fire. He turned to Gwen. I can't do this, he said softly, eyes bright, not like this. Not with this as the price of our first week. He looked past her, at her mother. I won't ask for money under a condition that shrinks the room you promised me you wanted to build. Sharon's mouth flattened. You will not posture, she said. The vendors are paid. The photographs are scheduled. Gwen's father has done more for this union than your entire line could dream of. Sharon, my father warned, but the warning had no teeth. He needed her anger to stitch this particular wound into the shape he preferred. Gwen stood still for a heartbeat, then two. Her bouquet shook. She set it down on the foyer console table very carefully, as if it was a baby someone was trusting her to place in a cradle. Aster, she said, looking at me, I was going to come by Sunday to talk, I thought I could make it right after. I thought I could fix the story by adding a chapter, you know? She grimaced. I see now I was narrating from the wrong room. Across the doorway, the band in the Hamilton Ballroom faltered, then stopped playing. The temptation to hear overwhelming the sheet music. The pause left the faint sound of cutlery and the indignant huff of a planner somewhere on a headset. Theo, who had been standing behind me like a taller conscience, took half a step forward. He said, you don't have to do it their way, not to incite, but to remind. You can walk anywhere your feet will carry you. My father turned on him with a precision that made me want to wrap a napkin around every sharp object in this hotel. He said, this is a family matter, and he made the word family sound like a weaker man than himself would be using it as a weapon. Sir, Theo said, polite and made of oak. That's the point. Sharon reached for Gwen's wrist, nails immaculate. Gwendolyn, we are not discussing this in the hallway of a hotel with spectators. She dipped her chin toward our room with a disdain that tried to invite the room to be ashamed of itself. It did not comply. Devin folded the paper again and slid it into his jacket like a man pocketing a vow. He said, with respect, he used the phrase like a scalpel rather than a sugarcoat. We need witnesses because this doesn't just happen to us. It happens in rooms exactly like this, where people pretend a word means love when what it means is exclusion. He turned to me. You made a room where the word means what it should. May we borrow it for a second?
The question landed in me like a ladle of warm broth. It's yours, I said. Say what you need to say. He nodded once to Tariq, who put his bow down and folded his hands in his lap like a benediction. Devin stepped fully into my room. The threshold had become literal now. A line of carpet that might as well have been a border crossing between countries with very different governance. Gwen hovered, still in the hinge. Hi, Devin said, and smiled sheepishly at the crowd in my room, at aunties and teenagers and my tailor and the florist and the man who always buys 2 pain au chocolat on Fridays. I'm Devin. I love Gwen. I thought family only meant what it means when we're at our apartment and her head is on my shoulder and we've burned the garlic and we laugh and order pizza and call you by your names because we know them. He breathed. I didn't know it meant this. He lifted his hand vaguely toward the ballroom, toward the binder and the tears and the notes. He faced Gwen again, and the way he looked at her made a heat wave go through the room. Not intrusive, not leering, just the wattage of 2 people trying to see each other through smoke. When we got engaged, he said, we promised each other we would not let the story swallow the truth. He touched his jacket where the paper lay. This is a swallowing, and I can't be the guy who pretends not to see the throat moving. Gwen let out a sound that would have been a laugh if it wasn't half a sob. She reached up and wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand like a child does, without caring for the makeup. She looked at our father with a kind of exhaustion I recognized from Mirrors. Did you write this? She asked him, small and enormous. It was collaborative. It is good sense. This is not about... His eye slid to me. He swallowed whatever he was about to say because to say it would defame him in a way that money could not fix. About me? I supplied. Say it, Dad. If it's true enough to write in a binder, it's true enough to say in air. He stared. This, he said, finally, each letter carefully placed like cutlery, is about protecting the Hargrave name. It is about preserving what I have built so that my grandchildren are not paying for your mother's choices. The room went so quiet I could hear the soft tick of a cooling light fixture. Miss Alvarez stood up, slow. Señor, she said, soft as a velvet rope that still means you cannot pass. You have never tasted your daughter's lemon tart, have you? He blinked, thrown. What? You have opinions about names, but you don't know what love tastes like when she puts it in an oven and lets it rise for you. I am not here to discuss pastry, he snapped. No, she agreed. You are here to explain why your love has a guest list. Something in him flinched. Something in Sharon stiffened. Something in Gwen steadied. Gwen said suddenly, looking into the ballroom where the band waited in suspended animation, where the planner pressed a headset into her own skull as if she could transmit order directly into the marrow of the night. I can't do the first dance yet. She looked at me and the lines around her mouth softened in a way that reminded me of the teenager who used to pass me notes that said, Mama's storming, hide in my closet. Aster, would you... She stopped, corrected. Will you... stand with me for a second. There it was, the smallest, most dangerous request. Stand with me. I walked to the threshold. People stepped back in that instinctive choreography kindness teaches you, making a path that was less aisle and more river. I stood shoulder to shoulder with Gwen, close enough that our sleeves brushed like a secret handshake. Up close, I could see the trembling she would not allow to escalate. I could smell the gardenia in her hair and the fear that she would be punished for stepping out of formation. I leaned a fraction closer. It is only walking, I said under my breath. 1 foot, then another. From the ballroom, my father's voice came, pitched for an audience. Gwendolyn, you will not make a spectacle. If you leave this room, he meant his room, do not expect my support when the bills come due. Dad, Gwen said without turning, the bills are already due. Sharon laughed once, a sound like glass clicking together. You two can play house in this community center petting zoo all you like, but our guests are waiting. Devin, come. She held out her hand like a leash. Devin did not move. Instead, he looked at Gwen's feet. Left, he said, too soft for most to hear. Then, right. He looked up at me with a plea that was more blessing than request. I nodded. We stepped. Left, then right. The carpet at the threshold had a seam. I felt it under the sole of my shoe as palpably as a heartbeat. A small sound came from the ballroom, the collective inhale of people unused to being present at an unscripted event.
In our room, someone started to clap. One person, then another. The clap that says, "We will hold the rhythm if you need it." It rolled forward like surf. Sharon surged, hand out. "If you walk into that room," meaning ours, meaning not hers, voice rising, "the grant is gone, the fund is gone, the house, the car." "Money is not family," Auntie Lena said, rolling her cane gently, eyes on Gwen. "It's a heating bill." Gwen paused. The clapping found her, landed in her shoulders, softened the line of her neck. She looked at me, and in her face I saw 10 distinct afternoons, hiding together from a storm of adult anger, her braiding my hair, me giving her the last of the good toast, the first time she walked past my bakery window after college and stood in the doorway crying because it smelled like safety. I saw all the times we hadn't gotten it right, too. I saw the bruise of the text she'd sent and the miracle of the apology that grew under it, like good fruit under hail damage. Okay. She lifted her chin. She stepped. Her heel crossed the seam. A sound rose in our room, like the start of a hymn, like a roof sighing when weather finally breaks, like a speech finally allowed to be spoken without clauses. Gwen stood in the family room with me. Behind us, the ballroom erupted, not in applause, but in voices, a scattershot of reactions, outrage, shock, a few delighted gasps, like people at the theater when a heroine does not die on the second act's cue. My father's jaw clenched so hard I feared for his teeth. Sharon spun toward the planner. "Cut the band," she snapped. "No music until we have control." The planner hesitated, then lifted her hand to her headset, human conflict versus contractual obligations flashing across her features. The band leader made a slicing gesture, and the music in the ballroom cut. The silence that followed was so naked even the crystal thought about blushing. Tariq, bless him, did not wait for permission. He tapped his stand, 1, 2, and his kids began to play Stand By Me, again, softer, closer, as if moving the sound itself could push the walls into a shape that didn't cut anyone in half. The music threaded between rooms, a quiet insistence. Even the chandeliers seemed to lean. Sharon moved to block the doorway, and Din, to his eternal credit, stepped smoothly into her path with something that looked like a bow, but functioned like a boundary. "Mrs. Hargrave," he said, pleasantly, "per our agreement, this foyer is shared. This is a wedding, not a rally," Theo said under his breath, but I saw his hands, open, ready, not to fight, but to make space. "Gwen," my father said, his voice dropping into the steel register that used to make waiters bring him extra napkins out of nowhere. "You will come back now. We will fix this. We will discuss this later. You will not—" He searched for a word and found one that had worked on both of us for years. "Embarrass me."
Gwen turned slowly to face him. Her face was very calm. "You are already embarrassed," she said quietly, "by the wrong thing." I wanted to kiss her for that sentence and also carry her out of the building like a princess who had finally decided the dragon was just a lizard with public relations. Devin took Gwen's hand. He looked toward Sharon. "We're going to rework the seating chart," he said, "and the grant, and the story." Sharon's eyes narrowed, calculating at lightning speed. "If you leave this room," she said, there she went again, marking the world with tape lines, "we will withhold every cent, and don't you dare think you can fund this little rebellion with tips from a pastry shop." Her gaze flicked to me, disdain honed to a scalpel. "You run ovens, we run legacies." "Ma'am," I said, feeling the steadiness that comes when you have already lost the thing you were threatened with losing, "your legacy appears to be fear." Color rose like anger, frosting her face. Gwen squeezed Devin's hand once, then to everyone's surprise, including mine, she let go and stepped up onto our small stage. Tariq eased the bow down, the kids quieted, one violin string ringing a little after the rest, like a nervous laugh late to the joke.
Gwen took the microphone I'd abandoned and breathed into it the way people do who have watched me blow flour into air and learned the pace of starting. "Hi," she said, and her voice trembled and then found its pitch. "I'm Gwen. I thought I knew what the word family meant. I thought I could make it smaller and it would be cleaner. I'm sorry." She closed her eyes for a beat. "To anyone who got the message that you were not included in my joy, I am sorry. That was a lie I told myself because I was afraid." The room listened the way fields listen to rain. "I'm going to dance with my husband," she said, eyes opening and finding Devon's like a compass that knew home even through fog. "And I'm going to do it here. Then we'll come back and feed everyone who showed up, in both rooms. If the money disappears, it disappears. If the house disappears, we'll rent. But I'm not starting my marriage with a script that cuts people out." She glanced toward the ballroom. "Guests, if you want to watch, you can stand in the foyer, or you can come in. No tickets, no tears." Silence. Then movement, hesitant at first. People from the ballroom drifted to the threshold, curiosity and caution holding hands. A few stepped into our room, shoes clicking with the embarrassment of people who are not sure if their footwear fits the new morality. Sharon's lips compressed into a line so fine it could have sliced cheese. "If you do this," she said, each word clipped to its bones, "you are choosing her." She did not say my name. She didn't need to. Gwen didn't look away from Devon. "I am choosing him. And me. And what words mean." She nodded at Tarit. "Could you play something we can dance to? Slow. True." Tariq lifted his bow and inclined his head like a man accepting a sacred task. The first notes unfurled, soft as apology, strong as promise. At last, again. Because some miracles are worth repeating until they tattoo themselves into the floor. Devon stepped onto the stage and took Gwen into his arms. The room changed shape to accommodate the sight, everything reorganizing around the axis of two people choosing each other without permission slips. The first turn was small, tentative. The second found a rhythm. In the foyer, people stopped pretending to be made of marble. My father watched, statue still. He looked at me then, really looked, and something like old hurt and newer rage shone out. "You did this," he said, almost wonder in it. "You, always with your need to perform." I set a table. They sat. He took a step toward me, and for a second I thought he might put his hands on my shoulders and shake me. Or hold me, or both, which is to say he might finally act like a father. He did neither. He turned away and spoke low to Sharon. She nodded once sharp. They both disappeared into the ballroom, and for the first time all evening, I felt a thread of unease pull taut beneath the joy. It hummed like a wire. "Watch them," Mrs. Alvarez murmured at my shoulder, eyes on the door. "People who lose narrative control do desperate things." "Like what?" I asked, keeping my voice light because the kids were still playing, and a woman in a coral dress near the bar had just started to cry in the good way. "Turn off the lights," she said. "Pull the plug. Call the police and tell them there's a disturbance. Move the story to a place where they can be the victims." She squeezed my wrist gently. "Get ready." I nodded once, grateful that she was the kind of person who could hold both a glass of sparkling water and the moral schematic of a moment. Theo materialized with two things: a battery-powered lantern we kept for storm season, and a look that said he was already 10 minutes into any disaster I could imagine. "Generators checked," he murmured. "If anything cuts, we have candles and lanterns. Kitchen secured. Din says the ballroom has no authority over our power, but they do have a friend at the fire department." He handed me a small card. On it, in his careful writing, Plan C. Sing. I laughed, grateful and terrified. "You are the Boy Scout I never married," I said. He patted my shoulder. "Next life," he said. Gwen and Devon finished their first spin and pressed their foreheads together. Private in public. Holy. The room applauded, not the frantic clatter of the game show audience, but the soft thunder people make when witnessing another person's courage. Gwen smiled at me over Devon's shoulder, one quick beam of light, and then looked toward the ballroom. "Dessert?" she mouthed, and I nodded, heart leaping at the idea of passing trays across thresholds like treaties. I headed for the staging table to marshal the plates when the hotel's HVAC made a sound like a clearing throat, and then like a bored god flipping a switch, the lights in both rooms went out. Darkness took us. Immediate, absolute, the kind that makes your heart sprint even if your head knows it is just wires in a circuit breaker. The music hiccuped and fell silent. A few scattered gasps broke like dropped glasses. Then, a voice in the dark, Sharon's, triumphant. "This is what happens when people who don't know how to behave try to run things." I opened my mouth to call for calm, to ask them to stay still, to tell them we had a plan, to tell them I had candles. And over the hush came another sound, small, steady, human, the scratch of a bow finding a string in the dark. Then another, then a note, pure and sure, rising like a star you can suddenly see when the streetlights die. One violin, then three, then all Tariq's kids, playing by memory and muscle and faith. Someone near me began to hum. Someone else found a harmony. Theo's lantern clicked on, a small moon.
Feet shifted, panic softened. The dark wasn't empty now. It was a room of people, making their own light. "Okay," I said into the dark, loud enough without a mic. "Candles in the back corner, servers to stations. If you can see, help someone who can't. If you can't, take a breath. We're still here." I felt for the edges of the staging table with my hands, found the first tray by touch, and lifted it. The scent rose. Almond, lemon, sugar, an anchor in a sea without shoreline. From the ballroom, a different sound. The pop and whine of a microphone coming alive on a separate circuit. My father's voice, amplified, rolled out like a foghorn. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone grave and practiced, "we are experiencing a temporary outage. Please remain calm. Security will escort you to the lobby. This event is concluded." The word struck me as deliberate as a gavel. Sharon's voice followed, sweet as a communion cup with vinegar in it. "Thank you for your understanding. Please exit through the ballroom doors. Do not enter the adjacent space. It is not authorized." I felt the pivot in the crowd, the way people at a bus stop turn their heads at the same time when a bus rounds the corner. Outside our room, I heard the shuffle of bodies, the rustle of silk, and the click of expensive shoes turning toward a voice that sounded like authority. "Plan C," Theo whispered. I put the tray down and lifted my chin into the dark. "Tariq," I called. "See," he said, still playing, every child with him like a lighthouse. "Let's sing," I said, my voice steady and my chest a drum, something everyone knows. He didn't ask which. He landed us into Lean on Me with the most tender confidence I have ever heard laid across a room. Miss Alvarez began to sing, low and sure. Aunt Lena, reedy and unapologetic. Tariq's kids found the melody. The servers layered under it. The sound grew. Not perfect, nothing like choir competition. It grew the way bread rises, lopsided, miraculous, sufficient for a multitude. The lantern light picked faces out of the dark like a painter with a tiny brush. Wet eyes, open mouths, hands held. Somewhere in the hall, someone from the ballroom joined. Then another, the tide of authority wobbling as the simple mathematics of a human voice you recognize rearranged the room. "Security is asking us to..." Din's voice touched my shoulder and stopped. His eyes glinted in the lantern circle. "Never mind," he said. "Carry on." We carried on. I moved toward the foyer with a tray of lemon tarts balanced in the dark like a dare. In the doorway, I met a wall of bodies being marshaled out by the hotel's security in yellow jackets. A guard held up a hand. "Ma'am," he said, not unkind. "Event's over." "Which one?" I asked. "Because that one," I jerked my chin toward the ballroom, "may be ending. This one is just changing key." He hesitated. I lifted a tart and held it like an offering. "Try," I said. He took it, bit, blinked. "I'm working," he said, surprised into honesty.
I shouldn't. Then say you're securing the lemon tarts. It's a vital perimeter. He laughed a little. Go on, he said under his breath, hand lowering. I didn't see you. I slipped into the current of people and raised my voice. A kitchen voice, a city voice. Dessert, I called. Free for anybody who can carry a tune or wants to learn. A few heads turned, chuckles in the dark. Someone said, is that the pastry girl? Someone else said, she's the one who made the room next door. Voices warmed, hands reached. A tart was taken, then another. A few people changed direction, attracted by gravity that wasn't pretending to be anything else. In the weak light, I saw my father at the far end of the ballroom, face afloat in the artificial glow of a battery-powered emergency lamp. He watched the drift, and I could feel him making calculations like coin stacks. He lifted his phone and spoke into it, a gesture that had always preceded changes in my life I hadn't been consulted about. Sharon stood beside him, lips moving against his ear like old spells. Gwen's hand found mine in the dark, fingers squeezing quick and fierce. He's going to do something, she breathed. I know, I said. So are we. What? I said, we're going to open the door. The door is open. The big one, the movable wall. She blinked. Then I felt her understand. The partition between the multi-purpose room and the foyer wasn't hinged. It was an accordion wall, floor to ceiling, that could be folded back into itself if you had the key and the nerve. Din did. Nerve we had. We found him by the glow of Theo's lantern. Can we? I asked. He looked at the dark, then at the people, then at the contract living in his head like a prayer. He violates 3 preferences and exactly 0 laws. He reached under the service table and produced the long metal handle that was not a sword and felt like one. On your mark. We moved to the seam. The lanterns clustered near us, mauves with intention. I lifted the first latch. Din set the handle in the lock and turned. For a moment, nothing. Then the mechanism gave with a groan like an old man getting out of a chair. We pushed. The wall began to fold, panels sliding like giant library stacks, thin lines of light knifing between them and widening. Air moved between rooms. Sound did too. The singing, stronger now, met the silence of the ballroom and softened its edges. Stop, someone barked from the ballroom. My father, for once unveiled. I will sue you. You are already suing yourself, Din murmured, sweat at his temple, arms steady, for breach of humanity. We pushed. The opening widened. People helped, hands on panels, a gentle communal shove. With every inch, the rooms became less separate ideas and more one strange, honest party. The security guard with tart crumbs on his lip shrugged and didn't stop us. Almost, Theo said, voice a metronome. Almost. A panel stuck. We leaned. A cry rose, effort, not fear. Then, with a reluctant sigh, the wall gave way. The opening gaped. Lights were still out, but the lanterns and phones lifted like stars. On the far side, my father stood very still, a man on a pier watching tide unlearned the rules he set it. Sharon moved first, toward us, eyes flashing. You will regret this, she said. A curse and a promise and a wish. Maybe, I said, but not tonight. I raised my hands, palms out. Friends, I called to both rooms at once. If you're leaving, go gently. If you're staying, welcome. If you're afraid, take a lemon tart and hum. We'll find you. The laughter that came then felt like the fatigue leaving the body of a marathoner. Devin climbed down from the stage to stand with Gwen and me at the mouth of the opening. He looked like a man who had walked through a storm and found a front porch light still on. I didn't think it was going to be like this, he said, wonder in the wreckage. Me either, but I had a feeling about the room. Tariq's kids, God bless their stubborn little souls, shifted to a song nobody needed the lyric sheet for if they had ever been a child, at a cookout, or a parent at a bedtime. You are my sunshine, slow and why and defiant. People sang, people cried. Some left, heads high with the dignity of those who needed a narrative that stayed tidier than this one. Many stayed. The foyer ceased to be a line and became a commons. My phone buzzed. A message from Poppy the florist stuck across town in traffic when the lights cut. Need me? I can bring candles. Like, a lot? I texted back one word. Yes. Then, hurry if you can, but we will be here. I looked up and found my father's gaze again. He was not moved, he was not broken, he was a man learning new math and hating the syllabus. He lifted his phone again, turned his back, and strode toward the hotel's service corridor, which runs, I knew, to two places, the kitchen and the breaker room. Din, he's going to the panels. Din's face tightened. We're already on backup, but he can call the fire inspector and have us shut down for occupancy violations if he wants to play dirty enough. He looked at my face and softened. We're not in violation, but I've seen men like him bend air around facts.
Then we get the facts, louder, Ms. Alvarez said. She pulled out her phone, toggled on the flashlight, lifted it, and with one hand started recording. Documentation is a song, she said. Sing it. Around us, other phones rose, not in menace, but as if to add a choir of light to the room's stubborn melody. For a minute, it worked, the strange piece of a crisis that has decided to be generous. Then, from the corridor, the whine of a fire alarm testing itself into consciousness. The pause, and then the full-throated bleat of a system certain of its own importance. Red strobes began to pulse along the walls. A chorus of groans, frightened exclamations, and exasperated laughter went up. The security team's radios crackled to life with the jargon of official interruption. The building, as if eager to be relevant, started to shout us out of it. "Evacuate," a recorded voice commanded over and over. "Evacuate! Evacuate! Evacuate!" I felt something cold and electric move through me. Fear, yes, and fury. I looked at Gwen. She looked at me. "He pulled it," she said. "He really did." "Or he asked someone to," I said. "Either way, he wants the story outside." Din's hand closed around my elbow, gentle and urgent. "We have to go," he said. "Law and safety, we can reconvene on the sidewalk." I nodded, throat tight. "Okay," I said into the mic that no longer worked. Then, louder, cupping my hands, "Okay, we move together. Pick up a person if they need it. If you can carry a tray, take a tray. We are not done. We are just stepping into different air." People began to flow, not in panic, but in that organized scatter you see when a summer storm surprises a park. Servers grabbed trays, teenagers shouldered violin cases. Aunt Lena took the hand of a woman I'd never met and proceeded to mutter that nobody was going to break her hip tonight. The security guard with the tart stepped aside and said, "This way, folks," in a voice that was half shepherd, half choir director. In the middle of motion, hands and lanterns and red strobes, a figure stepped into my path. My father. He had his phone in one hand and the expression of a man who had found the lever that moved the world. "He warned you," he said, satisfaction slicking his anger. "I said you'd be escorted out." I lifted my chin. I said, "You pulled a fire alarm. You put your daughter and her wedding guests in the street to win an argument." "I protected our name," he said. I ended a spectacle. I opened my mouth and closed it again because my throat knew that if I screamed the truth there, I would spend the night explaining the tone rather than the content. I stepped around him. "No," I said, softly, mostly to myself, mostly to the room, mostly to the idea of nights like this one. You just changed the venue. We spilled into the Boston night. The hotel's facade threw our shadows onto the sidewalk in red and white pulses. Sirens approached, slow because patrol cars never sprint to false fire. The truck would come anyway because the building required it. People fanned onto the curb, onto the small triangle of park across the street, into the space between two narratives that both thought they owned the lease on the evening. Tariq's kids stood in a cluster, uncertain, holding instruments like babies rescued from a flood. Theo put a lantern on the sidewalk, and it made a circle of light as comforting as a campfire. Ms. Alvarez began passing out candles from a box Poppy had produced from her car like a magician producing doves. Someone even found a long grill lighter because the world has a way of providing theater props when the script demands them. Across the sidewalk divide, under the hotel's awning, Sharon gathered the ballroom guests with the brisk efficiency of a field marshal. She said, "We will relocate to the private club down the block. Hargrave's guests, this way." She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Gwen. She didn't look at anyone who wasn't Tier A. I heard my name. Asked her,
Devon's face in the lantern light looked both older and younger. "What do we do?" I said, "We keep the promise." My hands shook a little, then stopped. "We finish the dance." "Out here?" he asked, incredulous and delighted and terrified all at once. "Out here," I said. Gwen looked from me to the circle of light, to the street, to the van that had our trays in it. She laughed. The first clean laugh of the night. "Why not?" she said. She took Devon's hand, pulled him into the lantern circle, and turned to the crowd. Our crowd. The borrowed crowd. The accidental crowd of this city that raised me like a stubborn garden. "Join us," she called. And the word join felt like the opposite of the word only. The fire truck arrived. Big, red, and serious about everything. A firefighter climbed down and took in the scene. 2 rooms worth of people, some in gowns, some in clothes that had flour on them, a cluster of violins, a box of candles, a lantern, a pastry cart, and a woman in a lime green dress conducting logistics with a tea towel. He blinked. He looked at me. "Ma'am," he said, "are you the one in charge?" I almost said no. I almost made myself smaller out of habit and humility. Instead, I said yes. "Is there a fire?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just a family." He considered this. He looked at the hotel. He looked at the street. He looked at the faces, the instruments, the trays. He sighed in the way of a man who has been to 1,000 calls and knows the difference between emergency and drama dress like one. "All right, then," he said. "We're going to clear the building. After that, you all need to either disperse or manage this without blocking the hydrant or the alley. And I didn't see those candles." He winked. "Strictly speaking." "Understood," I said. "Thank you." He nodded, turned, and with his crew disappeared into the hotel, the building swallowing them like red blood cells heading toward a heart in need of defibrillation. We lit the candles, we set them along the curb, on the low stone wall of the park, on the steps, on the piano bench someone had somehow procured from the depths of the hotel's lobby because Din had the keys and an instinct for theater. The wind tried to help and hinder, we cupped flames and coaxed them to live. Tariq lifted his bow again, and this time he didn't ask for requests. He began something old. Older than the building, older than our versions of one another. People hummed, people rested their heads on other people's shoulders. People who came from the ballroom and people who came from my block, who'd seen the lights and thought something might be happening worth being near, all made a circle and waited for the next thing to teach them who they were now. Sharon stood under the awning with a hard-shelled respectability and fumed. My father stood beside her, his jaw cutting shadows. He lifted his stoning end, and I knew he was calling someone whose job was to make me smaller. I also knew it wouldn't work. Not tonight, not here, not with the song Tariq had chosen. Because while the candles shook and the sirens quieted and the street turned into a room with no ceiling, something moved through the crowd like a rumor that turned out to be true. A woman in a navy dress with a clipboard, the hotel's general manager, walked toward us with 2 people in shirt sleeves, carrying a long extension cord and a portable speaker. She spoke to Din, then to me. "Our generator covers the lobby and 1 event space. The ballroom declined power. Would you like it?" I looked over her shoulder at Sharon, who had watched the conversation with the expression of a woman watching someone defuse her favorite bomb. I looked back at the manager. "Yes," I said. My voice felt like an instrument finally being used for the correct song. "Yes, yes, please." We ran the cable, we plugged in the speaker, the portable switched on with a happy pop. A single string of hotel cafe lights blinked and then glowed, stretching like a spine between the lobby and the sidewalk, courtesy of a bellman with a sense of occasion. "Okay," Tariq said, grinning, relief and mischief mixing like good batter. "Now we can really begin." He was right, only it didn't begin the way I thought. Because just as he raised his bow and the first chords of a new song dawned, someone on the edge of our circle called my name. Not a friend, not a stranger either, a voice I knew but hadn't expected. Aster. I turned, heart leaping in that confused, anticipatory way that the past puts on a new coat and comes to your door. The man standing at the curb held a small, battered case in one hand and a paper envelope in the other. The case I recognized before the face, my mother's old recipe box, dented on one corner, the latch repaired with copper wire by a person who didn't mind a visible fix. The envelope was stamped with my mother's handwriting, the forward slant of someone always leaning toward the next necessary kindness. He stepped into the light. The room in the street tilted, then steadied. He said, "I think this belongs to you, and I think you should read what's inside before you serve dessert." The envelope shook in his hand, and the single word on the front in my mother's script bent light like a mirror. Family. And it wasn't the only word on the envelope. Beneath it, in another hand, I recognized with a jolt that made the candle flame stutter, someone had written 2 more. Legal addendum.
Legal addendum. 2 words, black ink, my mother's tilt. The paper looked like an ordinary envelope, the kind you'd use to send a recipe to a neighbor, not the kind you'd hand to someone in the middle of a wedding reassembly on a Boston sidewalk. The man holding it shifted his weight, uncertain. He was somewhere in his late 50s, brown hair going to salt, jacket that had traveled with him through long afternoons. "I'm Harlan Keene," he said, as if that might unlock something in the air. "I worked with your mother's lawyer. I was told to bring this if, on the day Gwen married, anyone said—" He glanced down, then back up with a wince. That sentence. We all knew which sentence. Several people around us made the soft sounds humans make when the universe lands a punchline on time. I took the envelope. It was warm from his hand and slightly soft at the corners, like it had lived in a drawer next to rubber bands and stamps and a pencil that always needed sharpening. My name wasn't on it. Instead, family. Beneath, in tidy block letters, not my mother's, legal addendum. On the flap, a notary seal through brittle tape. "Do I open this here?" I asked. It wasn't a question about propriety, it was about audience. Miss Alvarez's candlelight glittered in her eyes. "You already built the room," she didn't say. "Let it here." Harlan nodded. "Your mother's letter is inside. The addendum is registered already," he said, patting the battered recipe box. "This is just the key in human words." I slid my finger beneath the seal. Paper sighed. The recipe box balanced against my hip with the familiarity of childhood. Its dents were the geography of my mother's kitchen. I unfolded the letter. My mother's handwriting reached up as if it had been waiting in the dark to touch my face. "My Aster," it began. "If you're reading this, it means a day came that I both feared and knew to expect. A day when the word family was used like a gate instead of a porch light. I don't know the shape of the hurt. I only know you. I know you will set a table anyway." I swallowed. The street gathered closer around the lamp of those words. Gwen stood with Devin, her hands clasped tight, bouquet forgotten at her feet. Somewhere, Tariq stilled his bow. The kids leaned in as if story could tune them better than rosin. When you were small, you learned that adults can carve out rooms of love and then tell children the pieces are for different holidays. I couldn't give you a father who knew better. I could give you law and sugar. The law first. Enclosed is an addendum to the Lindwood Hargrave Cultural Trust that your grandfather established when your father still believed music was good for business. I insisted on a clause that activates when you turn 30. Happy very late birthday if you have not yet celebrated properly. The clause names you co-trustee, with veto authority over any distribution that excludes you as non-marital or requires public disavowal of any child to secure funds. It further prohibits conditioning grants on family-only attendance as defined by blood. If such conditioning is attempted, funds may be redirected at your sole discretion to a community organization that holds a public, inclusive event within 60 days. A murmur went through the crowd, the kind of sound people make at fireworks right before the big chrysanthemum of light. Harlan lifted the recipe box a little.
as if to remind me it existed. I turned the page with a hand that had frosted 1,000 cakes and trembled maybe 5 of them. The sugar now. The recipe box comes with the trust. It is silly and it is binding. The family recipe for your lemon tart is a deed, sweetheart, recorded and notarized, conveying the remainder of my shares in the bakery space to the first use of family only to exclude you from a celebration funded by our name. Consider it my way of turning a slap into a stove. Feed people. Feed yourself. If your father tries to starve you of permission, open the oven. I laughed in a way that hurt and healed at once. Gwen pressed her knuckles to her mouth, shoulders shaking. Devin glanced between us as if trying to memorize both our faces for the future. Across the street under the awning, Sharon's posture sharpened into attention so fast I could hear the click. I read the last paragraph out loud because some words deserve witnesses louder than the larynx. If they ever tell you, we're only inviting family, tell them to sit down. Then read them the definition. Family is who shows up with a spare key and a clean dish towel. It's whoever keeps a bed made up for you in their heart. It's whoever teaches your hands the way to carry joy. If there is a price tag attached to your welcome, it isn't welcome. Take my love, and the law I left you like a pie cooling in the window. Let them choose what they want more, the story or the people. I hope they choose well, but even if they don't, you are not alone at the table. From Mom. The last 2 words blurred. I blinked hard, and the night swam back into its lanes. Candles, faces, the red heartbeat of the fire engine lights on the hotel brick. I looked at Harlan. He extended the second envelope, heavier, the edges crisp. A blue ribbon peeked from the flap. He spoke in a voice meant to respect both the letter and the person reading it. "The addendum," he said. "Filed with the registry last month after I chased your father's counsel for the acknowledgement window he forgot you had reached 2 years ago." His smile was brief and wry. "You turned 30 during quarantine, Miss Lindwood. Some men think time stops when it's inconvenient." A laugh, brittle and delighted, ran through the listeners. I slid the addendum free far enough to see the heading. The notary seal gleamed. The signatures. I knew my mother's like a river knows its own bed. I knew my father's. Heavy banker's script. And there, lower, my father's name. The ink pressed like a man who signs with force where grace would do. Conditioned and countersigned by a judge I did not know, and Harlan himself. "I have authority," I said, softly, not to punish, but to redirect. Din, who had moved closer without squeaking a shoe, looked at the paper, then at me. "Co-trustee means you can release vendor payments without contingent nonsense," he said as if he were confirming the weather. "It means tonight can be paid for in full, in either room."